This program contains true stories of rescues. All of the 911 calls you will hear are real. Whenever possible, the actual people involved have helped us reconstruct the events as they happened.
We usually take for granted that the people we love the most will always be in our lives. So when Mickey and Kathy Dart of Alpine, Texas, had their youngest child, Mick, they never imagined that he might not live long enough to fulfill any of his dreams.
You ready? Good catch, all right.
He was a happy little guy. Did the things little boys do. He'd crawl up on your lap, you know, curl up, go to sleep.
Count your fingers.
It was neat to have a son.
But just before Mick turned 3, he began suffering from some puzzling health problems.
He started to basically bloat up. His liver was so enlarged they thought he had a rare liver disease or possibly a tumor.
It's laid out in a long
After 2 days of testing, Dr. David Goff discovered what was wrong.
The ability of the heart to squeeze was very limited. And therefore, each time the heart beat, the blood, instead of going forward, a good portion of it actually regurgitated backwards. Now we're shifting to a sort of a donut view.
We figured we could probably control everything with medication and that we'd caught it.
It's sort of like putting premium gas in your tank when the car knocks.
And it may be something that he could probably outgrow as he grew older, his heart gets stronger, things like this, but it didn't work that way.
For several years, he seemed fine.
Yeah, get out of there.
We just tried to watch what he did so he wouldn't overdo.
Don't you like it?
He said he would slow down himself when he got tired.
I do.
Mick's sister, Christy, was 10 years older.
I was very protective of him because he was a lot weaker and a lot smaller. Couldn't do as much, and the other kids, they had a tendency to pick on him, and you know how kids are.
He never complained. He never asked for anything out of the ordinary. Every so often he would get a little depressed, and he'd come in, and Dad, why can't I run like the rest of them? I want to play baseball and I can't. And then it got to where instead of jumping on his bike and riding over to the neighbors, he'd walk over. And eventually the air went out of the tires and I just moved the bike to the shop and nothing was ever said.
By the time he was 11, Mick was so weak he spent most of his time in the house.
And then in December, I was down at the barn unloading hay for the horses, and my mother-in-law came running down there yelling that there was something wrong with Mick, and he'd had a mild heart attack. He'd had a heart attack.
By the time Mick was 12, his heart was barely working. He was taken to Texas Children's Hospital to be examined by a team of doctors, including pediatric cardiologist Jeff Tobin.
Lay on your back, and if you pull your shirt up for me. He was what you would consider really a cardiac cripple. In addition, his arrhythmias, the abnormal rhythm of his heart, put him at very high risk for sudden death. After looking at all the information then...
They just came right out and said he had to have a heart transplant.
I just kind of went numb. It meant either life or death.
When we continue.
Once you get on the transplant list, that's when you have your highest risk due to the shortage in donors. Most patients who die while waiting.
Because the Dart family lived more than 500 miles from Children's Hospital in Houston, Mick and his father moved into an apartment there to wait for a donor heart.
It's just a matter of time before his heart gave out, because it was everything he could do to keep him going. One doctor described it as running a semi-truck on a lawnmower engine. It just doesn't work.
It was real hard for me to leave him, because I had never been away from Mick more than one night since he was born.
Your mother called last night. She wanted to talk to you, but you were so tired.
You got to move up the ladder in order to get one, and we were at the bottom rung right then, and we had to wait.
Once you get on the transplant list, that's when you have your highest risk due to the shortage in donors. Most patients who die while waiting.
The morning he arrested, he talked me into going back to bed with him, right? I never heard him.
Mick!
I heard the same type of noise once before because my dad died in my arms. Massive coronary. You could see him gradually turning blue. And I couldn't pick up a heart rate, and I called 911. I knew I had to do certain things. I had to get the door unlocked. I had to give him CPR. I did make a mistake. I didn't get him off the bed. Instead of putting him on the floor where you'd have a little bit better control over him. My biggest fear right there was he may not be alive by the time they get here. I did a lot of praying.
Fire department.
The 1st Houston Fire Rescue Unit arrived within minutes, including EMT Arnold Tanguma.
His dad had said, I think he's gone. We don't think that way. There's always hope for us.
Notify him that we have CPR in progress.
All right, no pulse.
Paramedic Randy Cockrell was told about Mick's medical history.
Because the heart is already damaged, you don't ever know if you're going to have a successful resuscitation. I shocked him. He converted fairly quickly.
He's got a pulse, keep bagging him.
But you also got to worry about the brain. Because if the brain's been without oxygen so long, you will have brain damage.
He's back in V-fib.
1300.
He's back in V-fib.
Clear.
Clear.
I shocked him again.
Okay, check the pulse and bag him. Okay, he's back in normal sinus. Give me another blood pressure, see if it changes.
When his father was telling me all the stuff about his heart condition, it's hard. To me, I thought he would live for about maybe a day or two, and that was it.
Mick's mother and sister caught the first plane to Houston. When they arrived, Mick was in a deep coma.
They told us that they would have to see if there was any brain damage from the cardiac arrest. And so temporarily he was off the donor list. We knew that he couldn't get better and that he would never get out of that bed unless he got a heart.
I kept imagining what it would be like to go through a funeral with him, how it would be without him. Because even then, we didn't have him. He was in a bed, and he wasn't Mick then.
And they only let 2 of us in at a time, so we just basically did shift work to spend time with him. He knew we were there. He'd squeeze your fingers and respond to outside stimuli more.
Fortunately for us, his neurologic state improved to a point where he gets the opportunity to become a status 1, to move higher up on the transplant list.
They closed down the ICU unit for about 3 hours. We had gone home. I thought the worst.
Dr. Tobin said we were going to surgery, that we had a heart. I grabbed Kathy and I thought I broke her ribs. Because we knew this was, deep down inside, I think we all knew that this was his last chance.
Transplant coordinator Julia Price stayed with Mick's family while the donor heart was flown to Houston.
You always worry about all the things. Can the plane go down? Will the ambulance have a flat tire? Is the new heart going to fit? And is this going to be a good organ when it gets here?
We'll take good care of him now anyway. He knew what was going on. And I didn't want to say goodbye because I didn't want to scare him. I just told him that I loved him, and I said, see you in a little bit.
They said, this is as far as you can go. And I looked down the hall, and there's Mick's heart. I had read they bring him in the little cooler. It made us feel a little bit better because we knew it was there and that he was going to have a chance at it.
He was fortunate to get a heart donor just at the right time. Actually, I think the real reason he wanted a heart transplant wasn't so much that he noticed all of his problems, but that he wanted to play second base in Little League. I'm very nervous before the heart actually gets going and starts pumping. So we pretty much pace back and forth. If the heart starts, then you're in pretty good shape. If the heart doesn't start, you don't survive.
When they walked in a little over 2 hours, it scared the thunder out of us because we thought 3 to 4, 5 hour operation.
New heart's in place, and it went in smoothly without any difficulties, and we're off to a good start.
He was in a private room now, the recovery. The minute we went through the door, you could tell he was at peace.
Best he's had. Best he's had.
We got to put our hands on his chest and feel the heart beat. He says, oh, go ahead, it won't hurt.
Right up here.
His coloring was wonderful. I mean, he had rosy cheeks. His feet were warm for the first time in his life.
Surgeon O. Howard Frazier had performed the delicate procedure.
I think the bulk of the donors' families never really know what happens to these organs, but it can be so meaningful, and it can give a life to someone else's child.
Mick was kept in the hospital for nearly 6 weeks to make sure his body didn't reject the new heart.
Oh boy.
Without donations, there is no transplantation. And to me, for a family to be able, in their grief and their sorrow, to generously give so that others can live is the most wonderful gift that's out there.
Oh my God, you don't stop me!
We'll finally get some of those brother-sister fights that we never had before, and he's a normal little boy, he definitely.
He took his mother down and held her down, and she couldn't do anything about it. He's just that strong now.
I can go outside, run around, play, eat whatever I want. It's a great life.
Get him off!
A year and a half after the transplant, Mick Dart celebrated his 14th birthday. He will always have to take medication to keep his body from rejecting the donor heart, but his prognosis is very good.
All his friends played baseball, and because he couldn't run and work out, he wouldn't even go watch a game beforehand.
Yeah, perfect.
But this last summer, the minute, that was time to register, he was down there. The first time he got up to bat, we both started crying because he was having the time of his life.
I can see improvements in his coordination, his ability to run almost on a daily basis. It's still a learning process for him, but he can get in there and pitch, shoot, and growl was the toughest of them, I think.
Though they'll never know the identity of the family who donated Mick's new heart, the Darts remain grateful to them.
The part of their boy kind of still lives on. I myself had always said, oh, I don't want to donate my organs. I want to be buried whole, and no, it's very important now.
It saved my life. Then it can save another person's life. Because I'm going to donate organs too.
Thank you. It's a small word for such a great thing.